Hello, welcome to another episode of Four Tims in a Podcast. Slightly different episode this week. We're joined by another guest. So just welcome to the show, Paul Quigley, a friend of mine, a friend of the podcast, and somebody, a name people might be familiar with. They follow any sort of Celtic Shared stuff, or they've previously followed Fans Against Criminalisation in the movement that they had, getting the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act removed. Paul, I do wish it was under better circumstances that we asked you to come on. But obviously, it's to discuss the recent goings on at the top level of the club and the rumours that Celtic are sort of looking to appoint Bernard Higgins. We'll obviously cover how that came about and how the rumour came about, why a lot of fans are so against it, and sort of just cover it a bit more in depth and get your view, somebody who's dealt a lot more closely than many people will have. But it's something that I think a lot of people have got strong views on. We've seen that today where I'm at people that signed the open letter. But I think that's probably a good place to start. Just on the open letter today, I mean, it was probably one of the most united I've seen a lot of different fan groups for Celtic, a lot of buses, fan media. They all signed this open letter to Michael Nicholson, just basically covering how against it we are. So if you just tell us obviously how that letter came about and the feeling you're getting for a lot of different people, because you're obviously one of the people that sort of set that up.
Aye, of course, mate. First of all, thanks very much for having me on the show. Like I just said, it's a pity I always get invited on these things to speak about problems with the club or with the police or whatever it might be. But I'm glad to be on, and I do listen regularly, so it's nice to be joining you boys. In terms of you're right, the statement today, both in terms of the number of people number of organisations, buses, podcasts, etc., that signed up to it initially, and then the amount who've got in touch with us since was incredible. Really, it's forceful, it's unequivocal, it's emphatic. Really, that show of unity that I can't really remember seeing within my time of following Celtic and being involved in kind of fan groups, So even in the time since that this was released, so I think it was released about 12:30 today. Over 100 more CSCs have been in touch with us, asking to add their names because they want to show support, which is incredible. So all in, you're talking over 200 Celtic supporters clubs, all the main fan organisations, all the main podcasts, all the main fan sites, supporter media. Actually, too many messages for us to sort of wade through over the course of the last 6 hours or so. So, I mean, it is as united as the support has been on an issue like this in generations. So, for me, if the club ignore this, it would be a pretty blatant admission that they just don't give a shit about the supporters. It would be an admission that they never actually consider our views on anything. And it would be an admission that they view our club as little more than any other kind of run-of-the-mill private enterprise that exists primarily just to line their pockets rather than to bring pride and joy to the communities that sustains it. So for me, it would be proof that they're not fit to even grace the halls of Celtic Park, let alone run the place. So I'm hopeful that the sort of narrative that's maybe existed in some places for the last week or two, that this is an issue that relates primarily to the ultras groups, the standing section, the away support even. I think that's been kind of rubbish today. I think that's been put to bed. This is an issue that the support is united on. And if the club wish to push ahead, they're going to meet resistance and we're not going to back down.
No, I think, like you say, it was even amazing to me. Obviously, you came and spoke to us. I mean, I've probably never in doubt that we would support you on it, but like you say, we spoke about it when sort of the news broke and things like that, and it's even shocked me just how many different, like you say, medias and supporters clubs, and it's something you've never really seen it. So in that level before, and even that's something we should probably mention if anybody does listening to this that maybe run a supporters club or maybe sort of run anything like that. Is there anywhere they could maybe add their name to it if they were looking to do that?
Aye, so first of all, mate, let me apologise to any podcast, any supporters group, anyone at all who kind of feels like they should have been contacted, but haven't been. But it's been a few of us sort of chasing this up over the course of the last week. And the Celtic support is so big and so varied, and that's part of what makes the support what it is, but it makes it practically very difficult to corral everyone for a kind of action like this. So let me apologise to anybody out there who's not been contacted. There certainly wasn't any, deliberate omissions or anything like that. But what you can do is that you can get in touch with, really, I would say, any of the kind of three main groups that have helped to organise this, or at least help to organise this online. There are other groups like Boys and the Celtic Trust who've been great as well. But I would say if you can contact either Fans Against Criminalisation, which is at @KillTheBill on Twitter, or Fans Against Criminalisation, the website I think is an option as well. The other thing, you can contact Celtic Shared, who've been dealing with a lot of this. Now, through Celtic Shared, again, I know that the email box has been mental today. It's not been me manning it, but I know that the poor boy who's been trying has been sort of buried under a cascade of emails. So even if you've already done that, if you've not heard back, you will as soon as possible. It's just difficult getting through it all. But you can contact Celtic Shared at celticshared@outlook.com, or you can also contact the North Curve. And kind of those boys have been getting messages all day, I think. So there's plenty of kind of opportunities to get in touch. Even publicly on Twitter, we've been responding to people and trying to be as inclusive as possible, because I think it's quite an important moment to recognise that the support is actually coming together for once. It's not something that, as we've said, it's not something that's really happened very often. But I don't know, I was on the North Club podcast a few weeks ago, kind of talking about the first protest. So when there was the kind of silence for the first half hour of the game, and the kind of banners and stuff like that against Higgins, and what I'd said in that podcast was true, which was, I was actually really surprised by the reaction to that. The fact that, again, the stadium seemed to be pretty united against Higgins. But the truth is that I shouldn't have been, because as much as I've obviously been really close to the issue in terms of the Fans Against Criminalisation campaign and dealing with people and trying to help people who'd been charged and harassed and whatever else by the police, the reality is that almost every supporter bus, almost every person that goes to Celtic games, home, away, Europe, whatever, almost everyone will know somebody who was impacted by this. Almost everyone will know someone who had their life turned upside down by Bernard Higgins and his boot boys. And it should be no real surprise to me or to anybody else that that's stuck in the mind of supporters who were sickened by the treatment that was dished out to Celtic fans over the course of the last 10 years. And the last thing they want to see is one of the main guys who was responsible for this reprehensible attack on our support being rewarded with a job at the club after all of this.
You're absolutely right, and I would just say on that, I listened to your episode on the North Curve Celtic, and I would encourage MD to go back and listen. Obviously, we'll cover probably a lot of similar stuff. I'll try and keep you away from asking you the same questions as I possibly can, but that was part of the reason which sort of brought it to me and to the boys, thinking it'd be good to get yourself on there. Whereas, I mean, don't be wrong, there'll obviously be a lot of people who don't listen to both. There'll be people who do. But I mean, there's people out there who maybe don't have social media, but they feel just as sort of strong about it. There'll be people who live on the other side of the world, but like you say, they probably know somebody. They probably seen it from afar. Like, it's important to get you on, and we obviously feel strongly about it ourselves. So that's obviously why this came about. But we will touch on stories, I mean, our own experiences. I mean, Dan got to the football, obviously, as well as yourself, so it's something that we did experience. But I'll not touch on it too long, because, like I say, you have sort of told the story, and there's only so many ways you can explain how Celtic have been arseholes with their answers in one sentence. But when it came up to you, and you sort of heard murmurs yet, so I know that the soft rumours are here going about through a WhatsApp text, but In terms of when you first thought, wait a minute, Celtic are actually considering this, do you want to just explain sort of how that came about and how Celtic went about it?
So in terms of what I can explain in the North Club podcast is that I had went in to meet Celtic, it would have been maybe 2 months ago now, as a representative of the Green Brigade, because we had to meet, we were quite a bit into the season at that point. There were still some issues around practical stuff, in terms of how we kind of run the cover on a kind of match day. And I have to admit, I wasn't overly keen about having to go in. I've obviously been involved in campaigns against the board over the course of the last year, and I think the way that the club's been run has been shambolic. But we kind of went in, and it was really a positive meeting. There were a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk about trying to rebuild trust, trying to rebuild that relationship. Offering quite a few things to the group that would have helped us and really kind of been seen as a benefit by not just Green Brigade members, but by the whole kind of North Curve standing section. So we came away from that, mate, like really quite happy, quite pleased. There wasn't really all that much confrontation, but it was shortly after that we started to really hear from a couple of particularly kind of credible sources that Bernard Higgins was being lined up for this job. And what I'd explained in the North Curve podcast was that one thing we'd spoke about with Celtic was what we kind of made an agreement to do was to just go to each other, like adults, be mature if there was a problem, rather than, them kind of running to either banners from the section or revoke access for some of the things that we would do, or whatever it may be. They would come to us and we would kind of go to them rather than going straight to banners outside the stadium or, protest actions right away. That we would at least try and talk it out. So we got right back onto them and say, look, we want to come in, and we did, went in, and it was largely me that kind of spoke about that just because of my experience of the FAT campaign, and tried to kind of lay it out in the clearest terms possible why it was absurd to even consider bringing this guy in. And that was a really kind of detailed discussion with representatives of the club. And they had said that they would feed that back to Michael Nicholson, who had said he was unavailable to make the meeting, and he's been unavailable ever since. So we've tried our best to really sort of exhaust these options, to give Celtic every opportunity to back out of this, to just meet us, sit down with us, and have a reasonable discussion about what can be done here. But they've utterly refused to do it. I've been chasing up again over the course of the last week and a half to see if Michael Nicholson will meet at this point. Still nothing, still no response. And we've seen at the AGM last week as well that it's clearly their intent to just hide from this for as long as they can. And I think that they think that they'll get to just appoint him, quietly away from the eyes of the support, and that eventually we'll just kind of give up the campaign and get on with it. But it's clear how angry the support is about this, how confused the support are that this would even be an option. And as I say, we kind of joke about the fact that I've come on here and it's, not exactly the most uplifting topic, but nobody wants to get back to just supporting the team more than me, more than the other boys in the group and all the groups that are involved. There's so much to be kind of positive about the way this season is developing, about the style of football that Ange is imprinting in the team, and about the kind of mess that's starting to unravel across the water. Looks like we're in with a real chance of hopefully getting some silverware just getting into the Christmas season, which will be a perfect time for that to happen. It will give us all such a huge boost, but the problem is there's this lingering cloud hanging over Celtic Park at the moment, and that is Bernard Higgins, and it's completely self-inflicted by the Celtic board, which is where I think so many fans just can't understand why this is even on the table, why this is even a discussion. So unfortunately, Celtic are refusing to engage. It's fingers in the ears, just utterly refusing to acknowledge that this discussion is even occurring. So today has sent the clearest message yet that the support isn't going to stand for this. And Michael Nicholson is, obviously not been in the post very long. He's not really engaged with the support at all. He's not really addressed the support at all. But he's going to have to come out now and say something about this.
You're absolutely right. I mean, between obviously you guys reached out, we reached out. I mean, the club are usually quick enough to reach out to fan media and tell us about how Dom was leaving for this reason and that reason, and obviously bring stuff out before it hits the mainstream news. But radio silence told us they knew nothing, couldn't tell us anything. You've heard the same. The AGM again, it speaks volumes. There's no even an attempt to even justify considering them. There's nothing. It's just a complete ignorance coming for the club, and it's funny, like you say. It's obviously we're all the same. Like, we were all buzzing at the weekend, absolutely buzzing. It felt like normal service had resumed on the park. You had that just during that game. It was just Celtic. We were obviously we've played far better, but again, getting to another cup final, you really had that sense of happiness. And then again, it's just consistently, anytime Celtic seem to do something good, you just know there's, I always refer to it in the pods, another boot in the balls in the corner, but that's effectively what happens with Celtic. You just know you're never far away from it. And it just feels like we are slowly but surely, they're just picking their moment here. I don't know whether it's they can announce a new contract or something stupid. I've said it to the boys in the pod before. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 1 minute you see a post absolutely everywhere, a Jota getting announced, and then you just slip in something on the website about Higgins has been announced, one liner, hope nobody sees it. It wouldn't surprise me. We've seen underhanded things like that before. But I mean, just for a lot of people, this obviously Bernard Higgins, you'll know far more about his actual career and sort of things like that. And the direct hand he's had, we know a fair bit. I know he was obviously, I think it was, you mentioned in one of the other pods, he was a strategic lead. But for us, he was, in sort of short terms, he was the guy that dealt with Scottish football and Scottish football fans and how they were going to be pleased. And like I mentioned earlier, for me, it felt like going to the football then was different. There was 24/7 cameras on you, and there was just, they would be pointed at anybody. It didn't matter whether you were 16-year-old going to your first away game or 67-year-old and going to your 600th away game. Like, these guys stood in front of people with cameras directed in their face, looking for an excuse to jail them, looking for an excuse to get out banning orders, looking for an excuse to get out anything that they could possibly do on that. And like I say, you'd first-hand experience of that, being one of the people in sort of Fans Against Criminalisation. So I mean, for you obviously know just the impact that had in so many people. I mean, it must have been stomach churning hearing that this guy ruined a lot of lives, and knew the club are looking to sort of set him up for life with a cushy number and as the head of Celtic security.
Aye, mate, I almost have to sort of try and calm myself down when I get talking about it, because I did have so much direct experience of helping lots of friends, first of all, people I was really close to who had their lives ruined by this guy, but also lots of fans of Celtic, as well as clubs across Scotland. And the damage that was done was almost indescribable. So I would argue that absolutely there was a huge amount of damage done to people who were caught up. So people who were just unlucky enough to be the ones who happened to be dragged out of the stand or dragged out of their bed at 6 a.m, fired through our haphazard criminal justice system. And I've spoken about this before, but there is a continual pattern when people go through these things of, first of all, being banned from the football. And, just like you boys, football is so many of our lives. It's such a huge aspect of it. For me, it's how I see all my mates. I don't drink anymore. It's how I socialise. It's how I get to see old friends and family. To have that taken away from you, it isolates you from your social circle. It leads to a kind of form of alienation. Quite often, people would have their names dragged through the mud in the national press, that in itself would then lead to people losing their jobs or losing out on promotions. And that whole kind of cacophony then often led to, serious breakdowns in people's mental health, breakdown in people's marriages, relationships. We dealt with it all is fact. We dealt with all of these different problems that people were having on an individual level. And then so often when people got to their court dates a year later, 2 years later, sometimes even up to 3 years later, when they were found not guilty, and most of them were found not guilty, it didn't undo a single strand of that damage that was done. People had, their lives in ruins, or at the very best, their lives on hold. Thousands of pounds in lawyers' fees that we tried to help with, but obviously, there was only so much that we could do there. And then the police, the procurators, the fiscal service, those directed by Bernard Higgins, just move on to the next victim, the next person. And there was all that damage done to those people who were caught up. But I think there was also a collective damage done to our support of people who knew people that had happened to. So when you were standing at an away game or when you were watching Celtic at home games, you were always worried. There was always that psychological impact just in the back of your mind. I hope it's not me today. I hope I get home without being lifted. Or that psychological impact of boys Friday morning. We spoke about that in the North Curve, about how guys involved with like the Green Brigade and so on, how it was almost like a joke every Friday morning. We were all up so early because we were so terrified that the police were going to come and batter the door in at 6 in the morning. So everyone was out at 4:30, 5 to avoid that chap, to make sure that everybody still made their work. And it was kind of, you made light of it, but it was actually really, really serious and psychologically damaging. You need to warn, your mum, your dad, your wife, your partner, whoever you live with, that actually tomorrow could be the day the door goes in. And most of us experienced that, and loads experienced that across the full support. And there were some stories, some people that we helped, that the damage was so horrendous. The things that were done to them were so gut-wrenching that I couldn't even speak about them off camera to anyone, let alone talk about it in a podcast. So the damage that we've seen happen to real people, it's not some abstract thing in social media. This was something that so many of our support went through. And as I said on the other podcast, the idea of this guy, the image I keep having on my head is like sitting for a UEFA draw for like hopefully the Champions League group next season, and to see Bernard Higgins swanning into the draw in Switzerland with the kind of club tie on, rather than the kind of stand-up police tie that he's been wearing for the last 10 years. It does genuinely make me sick to the pit of my stomach. It's something that I would find unbelievably hard to swallow. And it's why it's extremely important that the support keeps up the pressure now, because we've made a huge statement today, and we need to make sure that it isn't ever allowed to get to that point.
I think you're right. I think that's the big thing, that we really keep up just how sort of united we are on this. Like it really almost is becoming the fans against the board, and really in football there's only ever going to be one winner when that happens. It's just like, as you say, I mean, for me, I know people that were affected. Thankfully, it never really affected me in terms of I didn't have my door getting booted in, but it was a fear because you were still in there, and like you say, whether you were in a crowd of 50,000 or 5,000, you always thought there could be 50,000 people singing this, and it could be singing or saying the most ridiculous things. I'll let you mention one I just really summed up for me was the young two boys. I think you said they were Hamilton fans, but just before that is you weren't doing anything wrong, but they'd created such a culture and such a I don't even know how you would phrase it, but it was almost as if they were doing whatever they wanted to have the biggest impact and really tarnish a lot of people. And as you said, the majority of these, for the most part, get eventually flung out of court, get not guilty. They really, on a law side of things, it was found they hadn't done anything wrong, but the damage was done. You don't go back and get compensation for a post dragging you out your house, making you miss work, and then all the ramifications of that. That's not how it works. Like, they knew exactly what they were doing when they done this, and it came under his direction. he overseen this, but it was just the story about the two young Hamilton boys like that. I think it'd be, like I said, you've said it already, but it'd be good if people haven't heard it, because for me that really summed it up, just the way these powers were abused. That's the only way I can describe it.
Again, you know, it was a point I made in the other podcast that we could do a whole podcast all night and me just sharing stories about what happened to people. I think one of the worst kind of arrests was the young Rangers fan who got arrested for holding a banner that said "Axe the Act," which I think really sort of perfectly captures, you know, just how broad the powers were that the police had and just how far they abused them. They were willing to arrest people for absolutely anything, particularly if it was something that challenged their power. And it's not really something that I've spoken about before on other podcasts, but I think, you know, maybe just now's the time, but it happened to me as well. I had, I think, 5 charges over 3 different cases. I lost a job over it. I had my name ran through the kind of national press. And, you know, the impact of that still sort of lives with you. It's something that might well follow me for the rest of my life. And, you know, that damage just doesn't leave you. And look, for my charges, so I had appeared at the Scottish Parliament in January of, I want to say 2016. I maybe need to check that, but I think it was about 2016. So myself and Jeanette Finlay appeared at the Scottish Parliament on behalf of Fans Against Criminalisation to put forward a petition to try and force the Scottish Government to have a review at the time of the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act. So I had appeared there in the January, and up to that point I did no dealings with the police before in my life. No charges, no convictions, nothing like that. And then once I appeared in the January, Celtic played 2 home games 2 weeks later, one right after the other. And I got charged once for each game. One for allegedly singing "Shove Your Camera Up Your Arse" at police, and one for allegedly holding a banner that had "Easy E" with a message about the police on it. Now, on both occasions, I was eventually found not guilty. But these trials both went on for over 2.5 years, and then were thrown out 5 minutes before trial. And as I say, the damage that does to you, it puts your whole life on hold. I lost a job, caused unbelievable stress with my family, and then even when I kind of myself and my partner kind of moved house. Within a month of moving in, the police were back at the door, not even as with a charge, but just to let you know, we know where you stay now, and to kind of keep up that intimidation. And I only tell that story because I feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes continually talking about other people, because you know, some of these other stories aren't really mine to share, I guess, as much. But it's important that people really understand the kind of depths that the police were willing to stoop to put pressure on people. And the Hamilton fans one is in terms of the impact, is one of the worst. So you had 2 young Hamilton fans at a kind of local Lanarkshire derby. I can't remember, one thing I can't remember if it was the Thursday or the Friday night where Hamilton played Motherwell. And apparently the 2 fans were sort of walking in to the stand, and they were singing well, fuck your well. I don't even really know what the tune is to that song. Doesn't sound like a particular hit for the football, but they were singing that anyway. They were both immediately, you know, dragged at the stand, arrested, and seemingly the kind of local cop shop, the local station was full that night. They took them from Lanarkshire down to Greenock Prison, where they were held with you know, serious criminals who were doing full jail sentences, and they were held there until the Tuesday morning before they could go to court because it was a bank holiday. Now, that decision was deliberate. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that was deliberate. They could have took those boys to another police station, and usually for like a charge like that, you know, had it not been football related, had it just been a standard breach of the peace, they would have been kind of almost certainly allowed out that night. But it speaks to the vindictiveness of how Police Scotland attempted to really bully and intimidate football fans into submission, to stop football fans from campaigning against the Offensive Behaviour Act, and to ensure that they were allowed the free rein to abuse fans as much as they wanted. And these issues were so common, it happened so regularly that even I've forgot half of them. You know, there are so many tales like this of ordinary people's lives being turned upside down. And what's important to know is it's not just that Bernard Higgins sat atop the tree. He wasn't just some figure that we're sort of attaching the blame to. He was directly involved in the key strategic decisions that led to all these huge disturbances in people's lives that led to the havoc that was kind of wreaked across the Celtic support and beyond. It would have been him that made the decisions on the types of charges to pursue. He would have made decisions on tactics like kettling, tactics like dawn raids, and he also was responsible for some other absolute fucking howlers into the bargain. So, the decision to have mind there was the 2 games that were due to be played at Hampden on the same day before they cancelled that. He signed off on that. And he was also, one of the things is that I've seen, that he's maybe so what Celtic said actually was that they would consider appointing him, and this was really disgraceful, really, really disgraceful. Celtic said that they would consider appointing him on the basis that it would help prevent a potential tragedy. Now, it's an unbelievable piece of emotional blackmail, regardless. But then, when you consider the fact that he was in this senior position on the day that we played Rangers in 2018, when we very, very nearly did have a tragic incident underneath the stand at Celtic Park, when there was a huge crush or near crush taking place, that the police were exacerbating, not helping, when the police were attempting to arrest fans, not protect them. And then the police Scotland under Higgins lied about it the next day and tried to put the blame on the supporters. So for the club then to turn around at this point in the juncture and say, this is the guy that we should trust with our safety, with our security, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. And I know that, it's not the sort of upbeat conversations that people want to be having, but it speaks to the severity of this issue. And hopefully people who are listening to this kind of fully understand that.
I think that's probably one of the biggest things for me is that, I don't know, maybe when you hear sort of, or when somebody who maybe doesn't go to the football as much, for example, but they just sort of, they were listening in, a lot of people would maybe take it as somebody's had a bad dealing with this guy, or these people just don't like him because, they're that type fit within, they're an ultras group or something like that. But like you say, there's people, unfortunately, like yourself, who had to go through that ordeal with them, never ever been, you probably never spoke to a police officer prior to that in your life. And then I know boys really, really well. Go to the football with them who've experienced it. So it wasn't just that they were targeting maybe a certain type of fan, if you like. They were targeting everybody and anybody who was inside that football ground who wasn't in a director's box. That's how they seen it. And as you see, these powers might have come in, but they were under direction how to use them. Like, some police didn't just wake up one day and say, right, this is how I'm going, this is my interpretation of this. It was his interpretation, it was his instruction. And that's why there's such a strong feeling. Something I didn't even think to mention was the potential crush that could have happened. I seen it firsthand. Thankfully, I was all right myself, but that really could have been an absolute tragedy that happened that day. And for the way that they reacted after that, there was a really strong feeling amongst Celtic fans when that happened, because I remember it on Twitter, just obviously seeing so many people who seen it, experienced it, were in it, and then for the way that they sort of palmed it off and blamed us, it spoke volumes. It really did speak volumes. And for the club to even consider that, is to use that as one part of the reasoning, is it's nuts. It doesn't even, there's no coherence in it. It doesn't make sense. But they really could have come up with something a bit better than that, and something that's obviously going to be so strong for a lot of people, and the feeling's so strong. And what I was just going to say there before, obviously, you come back in here, but it was funny. It was something that it was yourself I was talking to about it, and for me, I think it was you that said it. But the board, even considering this, right, let alone appointing the guy, but it's either ignorance or malice that they're doing it for, and that really does sum up. Because it was you to me that says, I don't know what's worse, and the more that you talk about it, and the more that obviously more stories come out, and your dealings with them, and our dealings with them, it really starting to paint me as ignorance. No, it's not. Sorry, that it's no ignorance and it's malice, and that to me really does just it solidifies that everything we've ever said, everything we've ever thought, everything that we've ever tried to convey about the board is true. They don't want fans that are like Celtic fans. They want a certain type of people, and they're willing to back guys like that and put guys like that in positions of power and in charge of your safety as fans after the treatment that he's gave people.
I mean, I did say that, mate, and sometimes I'm still sort of one way or the other. You know, some days I'm convinced this is just gross incompetence. They obviously are just so, aloof and so. They have such a kind of lack of understanding of the supporters' perspective that they just see this as another appointment, and they don't totally get it. But you know, they've been told. You know, it's been made clear. And I do worry. I have to admit, it does concern me that there is a really strong possibility that this is malicious, that this is vindictive, that this is payback for the supporters having the temerity to call him out on their disastrous handling of the club over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years. So, and if that is the case, mate, if you're right that, you know, it is malicious, then the sort of logical assumption then has to be he's not just been brought in, you know, to keep things ticking along. He's been brought in to specifically target, for starters, probably the two groups at Celtic Park. But then I think as well, potentially the away support more broadly. You know, it's only going back a few years, the club attempted to sort of rehash and rejig the way that away tickets are distributed. I think that it's no secret that they would love nothing more than to dismantle the basis of the Celtic away support. And I think that this guy coming in, you know, he's a sort of wartime consigliere. He's been brought in because he is used to this form of confrontation. He is, you know, I make the point that I think that he's the least suitable candidate to look after our safety and security, but he is the most experienced when it comes to waging war on our support. So, you know, I think it becomes difficult not to draw those type of conclusions, and I'd really rather not. I don't know. I don't know that the evidence supports that, unfortunately.
I think it really will confirm it for me if it so happens that they do appoint him. For me, at that point, that will be confirmation that it is just a war against fans and a certain type of fan at the club. And I'm like you, like, how bad is it that you're praying your board's ignorant as opposed to something else? Like, that's really where we're at. And it's just the feeling that I'm getting, and obviously everything we've discussed today. I don't know how anybody in a boardroom, these guys are supposed to be intelligent, smart, good at running business. Like, for me, that's bad business, and for everybody else it is as well.
I completely agree with that. And listen, I can't believe we're in this situation, but I would also say as well that I'm actually quite positive about, if not the way that the board's handling it, I'm really positive about the way that the fans are. You know, the fact that you've got unity. You look at some of those names on that statement, and I have to admit there's someone there that I've maybe been critical of in the past that I maybe didn't expect to see put their name to this, to stand up to the club, to show a bit of solidarity with the support. But pretty much everyone's on there. There's not a notable, you know, organisation, notable podcast, you know, website, supporters bus that isn't named in that. The supporting standing is one, and I think that's a really positive sign moving forward. And listen, the Celtic support has a long history of protest of standing up for themselves against both enemies, internal and external. And one thing I do say quite repeatedly on podcasts is I would never make the mistake of underestimating the power of the Celtic support. We managed to overturn a piece of government legislation that was supported by a majority government, a nationalised police force and a complicit media. So we can certainly take on the powers that be within our own club. To the people who rely on our money, rely on our commitment to sustain the business that they run year on year. We've got much more power than we sometimes realise, and than they sometimes realise. So if they have concluded that they can do whatever they want here, I think that they're in for a nasty shock. But it's going to take a bit more. It's going to take the support to keep pushing this, and hopefully we'll have some stuff ready to announce within the next couple of days that will explain other ways in which supporters can get involved. Hopefully that'll be out within the next couple of days. And there'll be more actions coming up, and that's a point that we've made to the board repeatedly, that this isn't going away, and hopefully the fans continue to back that.
You're absolutely right, and I think that it could be, while there's a lot of, like you say, there's a lot of stuff we would rather not be talking about. It's soul destroying at times. We're at this point where we need to discuss this, and we feel the need to put out podcasts about it and open letters and everything. But it really is uniting the fans, and it could be a turning point into the sense that the club could actually start paying more attention to them, and they would do well to. And hopefully that's a direction that we can go in, and the fans can continue to be united and realise that we have got so much more power already, just putting ourselves sort of behind the same cause than maybe we've thought in the past. But Dan, you've obviously been on this as well and listened alongside it. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up that I've maybe missed, or Paul's maybe missed, for your point of view?
No, well, I would say I've enjoyed listening, but it's sort of something you don't really want to have to talk about. But no, it's been fascinating. Like, much like what you have said, like, I've seen it firsthand. Like, I've went to home and away for the best part 10-15 years, and like, there's been times, like, I remember one, I think it was a Monday night game against Kilmarnock, and two boys I was with, they were just like singing, the whole Chadwick stand singing. I think it was a night Ezagiri scored at Rugby Park, and they decided to go to the toilet or to get a pie at half time, and I, for whatever reason, didn't go, and they two get lifted, and like, it was for like years. It took them years to get sorted, and like, I think last year, or the last year and a half, like, you've seen how much everybody missed going to football, but I can only think how bad that was for people who that happened to them, but their pals are still gone. Like, it's such a way of life for people, and I just think it's disgusting that Celtic are considering, well, I say considering, they're clearly quite well advanced with it as well, because they've had numerous chances to just, like, when I think it was just after we played at Easter Road that it sort of get rumoured, and like, as Andy said, we reached out to the club. We've got quite good connections with the club this year. It's worked well. Like, there's good people there, but the people we spoke to, it was like the media people, but they says they didn't know much, and I just worry because of how long it's been that, and how many opportunities they've had to sort of deny it or back down from it. Like, it just, I think it was Celtic Underground that posted the other day saying that they'd heard a rumour it was starting early January, but I just find it disgusting, and I think the guy's an enemy of Celtic fans, and as Paul said, like, the thought of seeing him at a UEFA draw with a Celtic tie on, like, I wouldn't let him buy a ticket for Celtic Park, never mind being employed by the club. But Paul, are you hopeful that with this movement and the fact that maybe Celtic will turn around now and see it's not just the ultras or the standing section that are opposed to this, that they will finally back down, or do you think it is just inevitable?
Well, I mean, that myth's been put to bed, isn't it, about it potentially, just being an ultras kind of concern or whatever. The support has sent a clear, unequivocal message today that just isn't the case. So I think it does change it, but I don't think that it means that we can rest in our laurels. What I would say is, if I did think that it was just inevitable, I wouldn't be wasting my time. I do think that the support has more power than they sometimes realise. I do think that we can force change, but I accept the reality of it. I don't I'm not someone who underestimates the willingness of this particular board to dig in and be vindictive and malicious. We've seen that last season on some other issues. But I do think that it's harder now for them to justify it because it's overwhelming, the message against this guy. It's harder for them to dig in. And what I would say is that even if he does come in, so I seen that post with Celtic Underground at the start of January, and that's the sort of time we expected anyway, given that COP26 was finishing and he was overseeing that, and Ronnie Hawthorne seems to be on his way out like at the end of the year. That all makes sense, but what I would say is even if he is appointed, this campaign is not going anywhere. Even if he starts on that day, we'll be campaigning at the very next game. This guy is not going to get an easy ride. And look, what I'd love, Andy, makes a point I'm on these sort of podcasts talking about this sort of stuff. I'd love nothing more than for us to, romp to the league and I can come on and talk about, Ange Ball and the way that we've been playing and that kind of thing and not have to worry about Bernard Higgins. But if he does come in, this campaign will continue for as long as it needs to. We ran the FAT campaign for 7 years before the Offensive Behaviour Act got tossed. The Celtic support, all of us will be going to games far longer than Bernard Higgins, I'll tell you that right now. So I'd rather spend my time and focus my energies on other things. I'm sure you boys would rather be doing the same with your podcast and the work that you do. But it's one of the things. Celtic Football Club, the Celtic board have put us in this position. And as I say, it's not the first time this has happened within our own club. You know what I mean? Even going back to the start of the break clubs, they campaigned against a guy called John McLaughlin, who was a director, because he supported the Boer War. The kind of protests against the board are actually, much more common throughout our history than we sometimes realised, I think, by our support. So if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. We'll keep protesting until the guy's gone. But I do genuinely think that if we can keep it up, if we can keep up the pressure and make sure there's an action more or less every game that holds that board to account, I think they're going to eventually have to relent, and it's on all of us to continue that push.
I absolutely agree. I don't think I'm much Mary I'm way as well. I don't think the campaign stops if he is appointed as well, which it would be an absolute crying shame, because you've seen, especially even at Hampden the other day, the support that the Celtic support gave the team, and I think all the stuff that happened about 67th minute, I'm sure that sort of lifted the players as well, and they eventually went on and got the win. So I think it would be the thing is, it'd be disappointing, but I don't think it'd be surprising if they'd done it, and I just hope that for once they sort of back down before they sort of let this get any further.
That's the thing as well. You make a point about the 67th minute, and obviously Forrest scores not that long later, but there is a proper connection that's developing between the fans in that team, and the manager. There is so much positivity. There's so much to buy into, and this is Ange having had one sort of rushed and hectic transfer window. The more players he can get in, hopefully in January, the more time he gets with the players. I'm really, I'm not always like this, but I'm genuinely really positive about the way things are progressing on the park. I was so buzzing, even at the weekend there against St Johnstone. Obviously, it wasn't, free-flowing, sexy football, but I was delighted that we really battled it out. That St Johnstone team are a very well-organised side, and for us to have been patient and broke them down, and then managed the game after that, I was buzzing. I was delighted with that. And I think it showed real sort of maturity in the team that we maybe didn't see a couple of months ago. So there's a lot between the fans and the team to be sort of positive about. But unfortunately, the board are the sort of millstone around their necks. They're the one dragging us back into these confrontations, these fights. If they're going to pick the fight, it's up for the support to stand up to them, and I'm sure that's what will happen.
Exactly, it's as you say, if the worst does happen and he does get appointed, I think it's only going to strengthen the resolve of you, me, and every other Celtic fan that's absolutely against this guy having anything to do with the club. It's another one. Just for when it eventually when we do win, and he has gone, we'll absolutely have you back on to talk about the positives and talk about Ange Ball. There's no doubt about that.
Happy days, mate. I'll have my party hat on the lot.
But listen, Paul, unless you've got anything else that you want to add in, unless there's any other wee useful bits of information that fans could maybe use or anything that you should look toward, then just a massive thank you to you, of course, for coming on.
Nah, listen, it was very nice to be on. It's one of the last kind of main podcasts that I've got to come on, but I do listen to this show. I've been really enjoying it the last wee while, so it's nice to get to kind of meet Darren, even if it's virtually. I appreciate the kind of platform that you guys. I also appreciate that you were more than happy to sign the statement. But what I would say is keep an eye on, because what I would say is, I'm on speaking about this, but it's not me running it. There's 200 supporters buses, and there's over 10 organisations and podcasts who are all chipping in at this point. So what I would advise is just keep an eye on the kind of social medias and the announcements that are coming out of the different groups, because there will be more to come over the next couple of days. And when you're asked to participate, if you could lend your support, it would be greatly appreciated. And we'll keep fighting this together.
Absolutely. But top man, and we'll be back again soon with another episode. Cheers.